Good morning, everyone. Today is Sunday, March 29th, 2020. Again, I'm Adam Carlson, the minister for the Midwest Church of Christ, located in Ferguson, Missouri. We are in the suburbs of North St. Louis County, just a few minutes outside St. Louis city limits. I want to talk today for a few minutes with regards, of course, as it relates to things that are going on in our society as we think about the ongoing coronavirus. And we know that it spreads easily, and so that is why we do have to take precaution. But I want to talk today, biblically speaking, about another type of spreading. And I want to talk about some good things which we can spread. And so be thinking about that for the next few moments as we go through the scriptures together. When one thinks about God's marvelous word and all of the great things that he has revealed in there for us, one of the things that we commonly find is the spreading of the gospel. And that's one of the things that I want us to look at here this morning, beginning in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 35. Matthew's account tells us, "Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people." So the teaching of the gospel was Jesus' primary work, and he tells us in Luke chapter 19 that the Son of Man was come to seek and to save that which was lost. And so we need to be so very mindful of that. And in Acts chapter 5, in the end of that passage, of course, here we have the account of Ananias and Sapphira, and then we have Peter and John being beaten by the order of the Sanhedrin. And then what we find toward the end of that text, after they had been beaten, in verse 42 of Acts chapter 5, the very last passage of that section, "And daily in the temple and in every house they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ." And so part of that, or all of that really, was that Jesus is the Son of God, that he came to the earth in human form, suffered in the flesh, and rose after being buried on the third day. And that is the gospel, the message to which we are to respond. So we should be spreading that. And of course, right now, we know with quarantines ongoing that it's not as feasible right now to do this person to person, but with the advancements of technology, we can still do some great things in God's kingdom. A second thing that we should spread is encouragement. We should think about encouragement and how we can lift and build up one another, and we'll look at a few passages pertaining to that. When one goes to the Old Testament, to the book of 2 Chronicles, and 2 Chronicles chapter 30, this is during the time and the reign of King Hezekiah, one of the kings of Judah, and one of the handful of godly kings, one who feared God. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, we find that he reinstated the Passover, and you can go all the way back to the book of Exodus and about chapter 12, and you can find where the Passover originated from. And so we come here, and what we find, because the nation had been unfaithful to God for quite some time, this was something that was relatively new to many of the people. And among them were the priests, the Levites, the descendants of Aaron, the brother of Moses, and Aaron's sons. And what we find in 2 Chronicles chapter 30 and verse 22, "And Hezekiah gave encouragement to all the Levites who taught the good knowledge of the Lord, And they ate throughout the feast 7 days, offering peace offerings and making confession to the Lord God of their fathers. Other translations of the Bible render that spoke encouragingly. And so we understand the idea. And so even though, again, it's not feasible right now for us perhaps to be meeting face to face, there are still modes by which we can do this. The internet, you can still pick up the phone and call someone or write someone a letter or send them a card, any number of things that you can do. And we find in the New Testament that encouragement was one of the reasons that Paul sent some individuals. In the closing of his letters to Ephesus and Colossae, we are introduced briefly to a man by the name of Tychicus. And when we go to Ephesians chapter 6, and in verses 21 and 22, we find these words, "But that you also may know my affairs and how I am doing. Tychicus, a beloved brother and faithful minister in the Lord, will make all things known to you, whom I have sent to you for this very purpose, that you may know our affairs and that he may comfort your hearts." And then we find him again in Colossians chapter 4, beginning at verse 7, "Tychicus, a beloved brother, faithful minister, and fellow servant in the Lord, will tell you all the news about me. I am sending him to you for this very purpose, that he may know your circumstances and comfort your hearts. With Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother who is one of you, they will make known to you all things which are happening here." And the books of Ephesians and Colossians are typically referred to as prison epistles, or that is, some of the letters that the Apostle Paul wrote while he was under Roman imprisonment. And so during those times, it was not possible for him to go and be with these brethren in the flesh as he so earnestly desired to do. And so it was necessary for him to send others on his behalf, and they relayed those communications to these Christians. And how encouraging that must have been for them. And so let us think about that. And then we think about in Paul's first epistle to the Thessalonians that he sent Timothy to them out of concern for their faith. And when we come there, we find Paul speaking these particular words. First Thessalonians chapter 1, or excuse me, First Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 6. "But now that Timothy has come to us from you and brought us good news of your faith and love, and that you always have good remembrance of us, greatly desiring to see us, as we also to see you. Therefore, brethren, in all our affliction and distress, we were comforted concerning you by your faith." And so there was a strong and earnest desire on the part of Paul to see the Thessalonian Christians, and one can go back and read the beginning parts of Acts chapter 17 to find more background about Paul's time in Thessalonica. And we know there that he endured some persecution and was eventually forced to leave after just a very short time of some 2 or 3 weeks. And so it was because of that later he wrote not one but 2 letters to them. And how encouraging that must have been to the brethren and the Christians in Thessalonica. And so those are a couple of things that we can be spreading during this time of difficulty, and good and encouraging words. And we need to think about that despite all of the bad that is going on around us, we need to be looking for the good as well. And so keep these thoughts in mind. And as Paul encouraged the Colossian Christians to do in Colossians chapter 3. And about verse 1, he told them to set their minds on things that are above and not on things that are on the earth. And that is exactly what we need to do this day and all the days going forward as well, remembering that our time here is temporary, and Paul would tell the Corinthian brethren in the book of 2 Corinthians that he refers to it as our light affliction, which is but for a moment. And so let us keep that in mind, keep our eyes focused on what is before us, and look into Jesus, whom the Hebrews writer tells us in Hebrews chapter 12 is the author and finisher of our faith. Have a great day, and God bless.